Hello YouTube! Today we are showing off my Desiccated Saint build. He is a primarily faith warrior who has many defensive spells. Looking at the stats there, I would change up those stats from what you see there. I would take a couple points out of strength, lower it to 24, take 2 points out of faith, lower it to 49, and get your vigor to 60. I was just playing with stuff, and turns out I didn't like the Crucible Knight's Sword as much on this build. It's really a strength weapon with a faith requirement. Using it on a faith heavy build with a smidge of strength, it's not the same, and you feel it. But this is the Desiccated Saint. I wanted to play with the Zweihander primarily, so let's get to the invasions. I will comment that I am atrocious with colossal weapons, mainly the Zweihander. Ever since they nerfed the crouch poke the first time, I never learned how to use them properly, even though they buffed them after that to make the crouch poke usable. I'm just bad at the timing, and if somebody has really high latency, it gets even worse. It becomes very hard to hit them. You have to frame perfect it, and even then, they can probably get away. And you'll see plenty of that. I'll try to point out the people I remember as having fairly high latency and what that did to the fight overall. But to continue on with my thoughts, this build is level 125, which feels like it's fallen out in terms of popularity. 125 was fairly big in Dark Souls 3, at least at the end of its life cycle when I showed up the last 2 or so years of its livelihood, and 133 for those people who needed a couple extra levels, and there's a couple other brackets you could play in. When this game happened, 125 was the preferred bracket, it seemed, and then the new players who'd never played a Souls game before, they came in droves because Elden Ring was overwhelmingly popular when it came out, even amongst non-Souls fan cultists. And yeah, they wanted 150 to be the meta because they felt like they could get enough points, and the old school people felt that, no, you should sacrifice. It should be a struggle to kind of get what you need, and that you should tick 80% of your boxes, not 100% of them. And that makes the builds a little more specialized. You gotta make sacrifices, and I understand that mindset. But playing at 125, I feel like I haven't done it in months, like 9-10 months it feels like. It seemed that people wanted to play, the people who wanted activity, they played at 137 about, because you get the 125 and the 150 bracket, and you do just fine. The flat defenses are there, your damage is still there, you're not really feel like you're struggling. There's a couple fights here where I felt like I was struggling. And that's probably because I'm just bad with colossal swords and I'm not used to playing on a faith build for the most part. At least faith build that's the primary component. I usually sprinkle a little bit on other builds for the defensive attributes. But you'll see that I can take a walloping in many of these clips I have prepared for you, dear viewer, this day, simply because I'm stacking defensive buffs, and it's fantastic. Faith builds can take a lot of damage, especially if they have a good amount of vigor. You can have Black Flame Protection for the huge physical resistance. You can get the buff that gives you 30% to all 4 elements in terms of resistance. You can get Barrier of Gold, which is like 60% magic resistance. You got your pick of the litter. You could just pick those 3 spells and you'd have a pretty good spread in terms of damage resist. But aside from damage resistance, the build can also eke out a good amount of damage. Even I was feeling that I wouldn't have enough because I'm at like 49 or 51 depending on which stat spread you use. Hold on, you gotta watch this. Look at that. All 3, the whole team just floating off into the distance. Classic Elden Ring connectivity moment. Start rolling, don't know what's going on, waiting for everything to normalize, and it's too late. They ganked me, an instant connection loss. Classic, haven't had one of those in months. But even at 51 points of faith, as long as you're using Golden Vow and the Physic Flask, the damage isn't bad. The damage is surprisingly good for level 125. In fact, watch this. Give him the bop, and then the follow-up, and he's gone. That was like 1100, 1200 damage. That's not bad. And assuming he has standard absorptions, he probably had like 25% holy absorption or something, plus whatever his flat defenses were. So, huge damage. And this stat spread actually isn't bad for the Blasphemous Blade. I'll show that off in a different clip. And the Blasphemous Blade hits like a truck. I probably should have used more of it in regular combat, but I always like the Blasphemous Blade as a swap to weapon, because I feel like if you're holding it the whole time, people will see it, they'll anticipate the Ash of War, and then it won't be a surprise to catch them off guard. Meanwhile, if you use it as a swap, you switch to the Blasphemous Blade, and then you make somebody's life miserable because you were holding a Zweihander 2 seconds ago. This was a fun little fight where I got overly, I got arrogant, for lack of a better term. And I had such a great head start, and I almost lose it. But this shows how rough it is trying to hit somebody with a Colossal Sword when they're really paying attention to you, and the internet's just a smidge off. This guy was fairly latent, from what I could tell. It was like a 180 ping or something, which isn't the worst, but it's not great either. Ideally, from what I can tell, you want somebody with around 100 ping or less. That's when it's reasonable. Ideally, of course, you want like 30 ping, and then you're wondering, are they in your backyard, or are they connected to your own router? Who knows? But yeah, I've been able to use a third-party program to keep an eye on people's ping, even the numbers associated with it, and it's been a lifesaver. It's wonderful knowing when somebody has however much ping, and as a result, you can play accordingly. And there we go. I live with nary 2 pixels of red health, but thanks to the Royal Remains hat, you can see it coming back really fast. Because that's what the Royal Remains set does. It gives you health regen, really fast health regen per piece of armor that you're wearing in the set, as well, as long as you're under 18% of your health. And this was another fun part of the build, because you can use the Great Bow, even though you don't have a whole lot of strength. You just have enough. 24 is probably what I'd recommend you put it, not the 27 like I did. That was a mistake. But still, you can use the Great Bow, and even if you're not a strength pure, or what have you, Great Bows hit real hard. They're mean, especially with those golem arrows. You can pepper people up, soften them until they're ready to go. And here's a funny moment I had. I was just bad-mouthing myself internally. So it's like, okay, cast the Barrier of Gold. Okay, now cast Golden Vow. Okay, where's Golden Vow? And I kept tabbing past it like an old TV that can only change the channels in one direction. But it goes to show that I'm a painfully average PvPer, but hopefully you're having fun watching. I'm having fun making these suckers, and there's Golden Land in the follow-up. Ooh, I love that follow-up. Gets those people who are panicking to make poor choices. And then, of course, Sacred Blade. Sacred Blade, I feel like, should be the core of almost any Faith build. Like, even if you're, like, a pure Faith, you can stick it on a straight sword, and it'll hit real hard. If you're more of a Faith Warrior and you have a couple more stats for the bigger weapons or what have you, a variety, Sacred Blade will still hit like a bus. It's too good to pass up. Which, it probably needed something that was very good, because a lot of the other Faith-based Ashes of War are kinda mediocre, or utility. Like Prayerful Strike or whatever heals 30% of your HP on hit, that's okay, but it's not phenomenal. Ugh, rolled the blood loss there. Very vital that you do that. It's hard. I've been trying to get good at paying attention to it. You want to ignore it in favor of damage sometimes, but you gotta pay attention to that blood meter. Or any status meter. Especially if you can roll the damage on a bleed or a frostbite, it will save you. Another moment here of knowing the level and backing up into the Zamor warriors. Because, well, when you're the invader, you're outnumbered. And if they're given free reign over you, and the 2 are working together, or even 3 players are working together, it's very hard to find an in. But here I can stack the talisman, I can eat the blood consumable, and look how long that meter is. They're going to have a lot harder time bleeding me now. I had a friend propose the idea to me recently that I should make a build card, like I could stick at the end of a video, or maybe even at the beginning, that would have basically on one screen the shorthand for the build. So the stat spread, the armor, talismans, weapons, all sorts of things. And I'm not sure how I would organize that right off the bat to fit everything, because to me, the build is not just the weapon, it's the Ashes of War on each weapon. It's not just the armor, it's the talismans and the talisman configuration, like the way they're set up in the inventory. And that's a lot to include on one page. Now, maybe I could do it. I've been a fan of, so far, just looking over everything over the course of a minute and allowing people who are interested in mimicking the build to just pause or, you know, derive their own inspirations from it. But maybe I'll look into that more. A neat little title card, or a card to show the build in shorthand. And as far as I'm aware, nobody's standardized any sort of method to show off an Elden Ring build in one screen. And I feel like it'd have to be a pretty good resolution for you to look around and get the idea across. But I'll think about that a little more and get back to you. That might be more effort, but hey, if it's convenient and useful, why not? For those who want to do their own builds. Oh, how I do love when you use Golden Land on the Zweihander, how your character holds the sword in a half-swording grip, which is a technique in fencing and with long swords that refers to gripping the central part of the sword blade in the left hand in order to execute a more forceful thrust against armored and unarmored opponents. Now, he just plunges it into the ground to cast a spell, essentially, but I still like that it happens. It's a neat little detail that makes me smile. I suppose I should talk about a little bit what was the inspiration behind this character, because recently in the lore through I had played through Celia, Town of Sorcery, and I had noticed that even though it was a town of sorcery, obviously inspired by the Nox and the Eternal Empires, if not having been a part of them at one point in time, that they had icons of Laendel around about the place, especially a big old tree sentinel statue. And so I thought, well, the Redmanes and Radahn, they're kind of this weird hybridization between inspirations from Lord Godfrey and the Golden Lineage, as well as Radagon, champion of Laendel, right? That's who Radahn is as a character. He's inspired by both of those. So what if I came up with the Desiccated Saint, a sort of chaplain in Radahn's forces that is a transplant from Laendel, and this is him in his sorry, undead state? I don't know how much headcanon detail I should go into for each build, but that's just a brief snippet if you were curious as to what I was going for. Now, can the undead wield holy magic? No, not really, but I figured it would be neat. Maybe he's just trying to represent that sort of desiccated state of the Golden Order. Who knows? You can come up with whatever you'd like for your own headcanon. I don't flesh him out a whole lot because it's just a character I plan to play for a bit, kind of experiment with a few things, and then move forward. This character mostly was to experiment with a Faith Warrior and to get better at the Zweihander. I probably got a little better, but I'm still not great with the Zweihander. Maybe I need to do duels with it, but it feels like a very slow weapon. Not that it's bad, I'm telling you I'm bad. I think it's a good weapon. You've seen me chunk people with it. It definitely has a whole lot of potential. As for builds, I'm not sure what sort of character I'm going to do next. I mean, I kind of had a roadmap when I first started. I was going to do the City Watch, and then I did the Dex build, and then I followed up with Cousin Albie and the Status build. And since then I've had a couple more, Flamehand Moira and the War Wizard. I might do a pure strength build next, though I feel like it's going to be slightly derivative of the City Watch. Or maybe I should do a part 2 on any of the builds I've already done. I'm still experimenting to see what I like. I have yet to find a Dex build I really like for one, so maybe I'll overhaul that. Just Dex weapons and I don't jive. But then again, I also really enjoyed Flamehand Moira, throwing fireballs. Maybe I'll get a Bolt of Grand Sax on a Dex build and do some sniping for fun. That could be a good twist. Maybe I'll put in the intervention sniper rifle sound and couple it with a hit marker. That would be kind of fun. It's been really nice to receive a little bit of feedback for these silly videos. At the time of recording this, I have like 68 subscribers on the YouTube channel, which is insane to me. I feel like every channel that experiences growth of any kind always has, oh, I never thought we'd hit 1,000 subscribers. And every time I see 3 or 4 more subscribers, assuming they're not all bots, that's incredible. I can't believe people would actually click the subscribe button, especially since I'm doing this just kind of as a hobbyist thing and not to get fame or renown of any sort. It's just fun. It's a challenge. I learn new skills. I learn how to edit better. I hopefully learn how to play the game better. And it's a whole slew of skills that complement each other to run and create content for a YouTube channel. So to those of you who have subscribed to that or not bots, actually, you know what? I'll thank the bots as well. It's good to have you here. Some people have left some really kind, thoughtful comments, which is always appreciated. I don't know if I would prefer 0 feedback or negative feedback. I haven't had a negative feedback yet, and I assume it will happen. It's bound to. There's going to be somebody. And I hope I can react to that in a gracious manner, or be even more gracious and not react at all, as to not feed the trolls, so to speak. But I assume so long as I'm trying to be kind and gracious to other people and not patronizing or peddling falsehoods, that I shouldn't earn too much negative feedback. Then again, I'm casual, though maybe I'm not casual enough. I felt so bad for this fight here, because the host just randomly AFK'd at the end of the fight, just taking the whole wind out from my sails. It was a fun fight. I was getting the snot beat out of me. I was expecting them to win, and then suddenly the host goes AFK, and the Phantom just eats it, and then the host is just dead at the end there. It felt so bad. What an anticlimactic solution. But I left it in there because the fight leading up to it, I felt was good. Here is what I would like to examine for a moment as a little case study in character interaction and etiquette. So this fellow's just standing here. We haven't bowed to each other. He's letting me buff, and he's not engaging me in any meaningful way. Maybe he wanted to do the guard counter. I couldn't tell you why he did that. And there's lots of people in the environment who believe in very particular etiquettes that ought to exist. Oh, you should emote when you first enter the arena. If you want to duel, you should bow. You shouldn't heal if you're dueling. And it's funny how these rules of etiquette crop up out of nothing. They're fabricated out of whole cloth. And there's nothing really in the game to insist that that's how things should, and ought to be. And I'm a fan of, you should play to your character. If your character is vicious and bloodthirsty, maybe you should act bloodthirsty. If your character's an honorable knight, maybe you should try to wave and bow first. I think that's far more interesting than sticking to one or the other constantly. But that's just me. This fight here is interesting. If you want to see what a 300 ping latency fight looks like, it's this one. There are so many hits that feel like they should have connected, and just nothing works. And even some hits, if you watch carefully, they hit just a smidge early. I feel like I had one guy who's really latent when I was fighting him. I think it was the City Watch video, where he would swing a weapon and hit me noticeably early. And that's just how it is. Sometimes you're fighting with people who are across the pond and the internets just don't like each other. They might have good internet for where they live. I know for where I live, I have fairly good internet. And so for the most part, if I have people in the United States and Northern Canada, we have about 100 ping or better, right? So I don't know where these people were from, but it made fighting them a huge chore. And you can't trade with latency. The person who's latent will always win, and they will dodge, and they will always hit you when you least expect it. Spacing is not real. You have to have a status tool of some kind. I do have one on this character. I switched to it right after we deal with that Phantom, because I just can't hit this guy to save my life. And that's what the old Stitcher with poison on it is for. Because if you can poison your target and then just keep harassing them enough that they can't drink, or punishing them when they do drink their flask, that's your best bet against a latent opponent. Which is really sad that you have to change your whole build in if you want to kill somebody who's late. It's very unfortunate, and I don't know if there is a feasible way to fix it. That's just the state of the internet. And look at this champion. Hit me with the blood loss while I'm trying to buff in front of him. I was probably expecting him to be kind of like the other heavily armored shield boy from 2 clips ago. Yet this fellow, I remember we have a fairly good connection. I'm able to catch him with my attacks. He had like no more than 120 ping if I recall. And so it feels good when you have a fairly reasonable connection because your attacks hit where you think they should, need, and ought to. And that's always good times. I suppose what I should do is I should ask the audience if they have any builds or build ideas that I could go with, that they would like to see me try to hodgepodge together, or perhaps they'd like to see me revisit a build and maybe clean it up a little bit. Because everything is always a work in progress. No build is finalized. Everything can be tweaked. Some days you'll want to play with different weapons versus others. Some days you'll find out that some weapons work better, and then maybe a balance patch will show up and completely destroy your preconceived notions on how an ability ought to work. It could really be anything at this point, but it's an ever-changing field, and I could come up with ideas, and I will, but it would be neat to see some feedback. It's not like the PvP videos will stop. Worst that happens is I revisit a character while I ruminate about what I should be using for a build. Another thing I need to practice, though, is switching talismans. I am awful at switching talismans. This character is configured so that if I take a certain amount of damage, I should be switching off my first and second talismans into something else. Because I have the bonus health talisman as well as the ritual shield talisman so that I have more absorption for that first hit. And I am absolute garbage when it comes to switching those first two. I should be switching the shield talisman to like the Alexander shard, and then the next one into either the life regen or the swaddling cloth talisman, or maybe even I don't know, the jump damage talisman, something. There's a whole slew of options I ought to be using and swapping to, and I'm just bad at it. I forget. I get so preoccupied with smacking the other guy that I do abysmally at switching those talismans. I feel like the only time I remember is when the other person's playing really passive and I have time to finagle with my inventory and figure out what I should have on. So this is a fun moment. I talked earlier about how the Blasphemous Blade hits like a truck with this build, and while I whiff the Taker's Flame a few times because I'm overly greedy and trying to reclaim the clip that I had lost to specify, I had recorded a clip, or thought I had recorded a clip, where I took down 2 people in a world, a host and his phantom, with Taker's Flame, and I didn't record it. I messed up. And the very next clip, or the very next fight, I managed to get this clip, so I felt like I'd regained what I had lost. But still, Taker's Flame hits like a bus. Have some strength, have some dex, mostly faith, burns people to death. You could center this whole build around the Taker's Flame and the Blasphemous Blade. Just change the physic, use Flame, grant me strength, or what have you, and it would do wonderful. Here's another thing you may not have known. The Golden Blade Epitaph, my offhand sword here, it has an Ash of War that buffs the holy damage of your weapons, and it buffs them by a good amount. And turns out having a coated sword and an Epitaph Sword together, after having buffed up, hits real hard. Does good damage. I think it's slightly better than having 2 coated swords, because 2 coated swords, though it's pure holy damage and it's really good, don't get me wrong. The Epitaph Sword gives you a little... It just has such a high AR. The AR was like 780 or 790 after the buff and the physic, which is insane for a straight sword to have damage that high. Now, granted, it's split damage, but still. Really big number, very impressive. Please use it. Here at the end, this is our final clip before I show the build again. I was trying to show off the lances, because I don't believe I had for any sustainable length of time, except for that one fight where the host disconnected, I suppose, but I was wanting to show off more of the build. I feel like I've been pretty poor at showing off all the different weapons that are available. Look how little his Blasphemous Blade hit me for. That's because I had buffed myself with the spell that gives me 30% to all my elemental resistances. A little bit of a computer stutter there. And I had the shield talisman on. And so his Taker Flame only did like 10% of my health bar, which is outrageously low for power level bracket and presumably the upgrade level of his weapon and his stat spread. Unless his stat spread was absolutely not meant for that. But here's the naked guy, and if that is not a testament to why you shouldn't play naked, I don't know what is. He was comboed by the charging double attack on the lances. How sad. So, here's the build again. I have the Holy Shroud and Cracked here, and the Crimson Bubble tier, and the Flask. There's the stat spread. Take 3 points out of Strength and 2 points out of Faith. Get that Vigor to 60, you won't regret it. And there are the talismans, the weapons, started as a Vagabond. And here are the weapons yet again. I had a good time with this build. It was a little bit different of an inventory makeup that I'm used to using, though it's very tight, it's very concise, it's easy to remember where everything's at. I was not so good on the swaps, but maybe in a future video I will be. Here's the talismans, and the options you may like to swap between. All of the highly used talismans are grouped together. But I'm thankful to have you for these videos. It's been loads of fun, and I'm excited to see what else the future will bring. And I hope you have yourself a fantastic day. Bye-bye now.